Do you believe people can really change? Or do they just get better at hiding things?
I am going to start with the moment that snapped something clean inside me, not because I enjoy reliving it, but because it is the only honest way to explain what came next and why I did not flinch, and it was this simple and this ugly at the same time. On my birthday, while I was still smiling the kind of smile you use when you are trying to keep the peace and not make a scene, my dad slid an envelope across the table to my brother, and, with that proud little nod he saves for when he is rewarding good behavior, told him to open it, and when Ryan pulled out a crisp stack of papers and said it was a deed to a condo and that the bank had already approved everything and that all he needed to do was sign, the table broke into that forced laughter people do when they want to look generous on cue, and I sat there listening to congratulations and jokes about housewarming parties and parking spots while in front of me there was another envelope, a smaller one, with a greeting card that said, "Happy birthday" on the front in those sugary letters that smell like a pharmacy aisle, and my name inside with a quick "love you" and a scribble like a doctor's prescription. And I kept nodding because that is what I have been trained to do since middle school when my father started calling my brother the future of the family and started calling me the responsible one, as if responsibility were a consolation prize that you give the kid who does not get the trophy. I should tell you the thing that kept me quiet all those years was not weakness, because I am not weak, and it was not fear, because I do not fear them anymore. It was something like loyalty mixed with the hope that if I waited long enough the math would balance, and they would notice how many holidays I hosted, how many phone calls I took when things went sideways for everyone else, how many gifts I bought when money was tight and nobody wanted to admit it, and how many Sunday afternoons I spent listening to my mother explain why Ryan needed another chance, because he was under pressure and could not be expected to handle it with the grace I did, and I have been swallowing that speech since I was a teenager. But the envelope with the condo was the kind of slap you feel in your bones, and if you have ever been in a room where people are celebrating something that you know you paid for with your patience and your silence, then you know the taste that rises in your mouth, sharp and metallic like biting down on tinfoil, and you either excuse yourself to cry in the bathroom, or you decide to open a different envelope entirely. So I reached into my bag and pulled out a plain card I had written for my parents, and there was nothing fancy about it. No glitter, no flowers, no long paragraph about gratitude. Just a short message in my own handwriting that I had rewritten a handful of times because I wanted it to land without theatrics, and I handed it to my dad and said, "I have a little note for you and Mom, and could you read it now? Because it would mean more to me if you read it today," and for a second he looked surprised, like I had brought homework to a picnic, but he opened it anyway and read the first line out loud the way he does if he expects something sentimental, and then his voice dropped because he realized what it was. And what it was not a threat, and not an accusation, and not a confession. It was just the truth dressed in clear words that did not leave much air to wriggle through. I wrote that I was done keeping the kind of family secrets that get handed to the responsible child like a dirty dishcloth, and that I had kept quiet when I was asked to sign an affidavit years ago to help with a situation that was supposed to disappear, and that I had lied to someone who deserved honesty because I was told it would protect our last name, and that today I was making a different choice and putting my name first, and that this card was my written record that I would no longer be available to cover financial gaps, legal gaps, or the gaping hole where accountability should have been, and at the bottom I had added one line that was not loud but could not be mistaken. I said I hoped the condo paperwork was cleaner than the mess we hid the last time we were all asked to smile through it. He did not look up right away, and I could feel my mother stiffen like someone had opened a window in winter, and Ryan, who had been busy posting a photo of the deed with a caption about new beginnings, stopped mid-sentence because he is not dumb, and he knows the tone in my father's voice when the ground just moved under his feet, and I did not say anything else because I did not need to, and for once I let the silence do the work for me, and it did. Because you could hear forks pause and a chair scrape, and the way people exchange looks when they know there is a story they were not supposed to hear, but now they want all of it, and it was not dramatic in the movie way. It was just that the air felt different and nobody was sure if I was about to set the table on fire or simply stand up and leave them to chew on it. Here is the part that matters to me, and I am telling you this so you understand the shape of my anger. I have never wanted what Ryan has. I do not want his applause or his shortcuts or his constant need for someone to fix the hole he keeps falling into. I wanted fairness, and when fairness is not on the menu, you find another way to feed yourself. And that card was me picking up a knife and fork with my own name on them and saying I am done eating crumbs. And if that sounds harsh, then you have not spent your 30s watching your parents spend their energy rescuing an adult man from his own decisions while telling you they are proud of you for being low maintenance. The room did not explode, nobody shouted, nobody cried, and that might sound disappointing if you're expecting fireworks, but quiet can be louder than a slammed door. And in that quiet, I saw my dad fold the card back into the envelope like he was trying to put toothpaste back in the tube, and he said we should talk about this later, and I said sure, later works, I am around. And I let a smile sit on my face that was not polite. It was something else. He has not seen much from me. It was certainty. And then I did one small thing that will sound petty, but it was the first step of my plan, and it felt like justice in a small, clean way, because when Ryan slid the deed across the table to show me his full name typed out so official and grown up, I pulled my phone, took a picture with the document clearly visible, and texted it to myself with a subject line that would be impossible to miss if anyone ever went looking through shared files or family threads, and the subject line was not a threat. It was a timestamp, proof of gift preference, birthday dinner, and yes, my dad saw me do it, and yes, he went pale, and no, I did not explain, because I wanted him to sit with the new reality where I am not the daughter who conveniently forgets. I am the daughter who documents. That was the first move, not screaming, not storming out, just putting the truth in writing and making sure it had a date and a picture to go with it. And when my mother finally found her voice and asked me what I meant by the line about cleaner paperwork, I said we can go through it together, line by line, tomorrow, and I almost laughed at how fast my father said that would not be necessary. And then I picked up my bag and my keys and told them I was heading out because I had a full day tomorrow and did not want to be tired, which was true, and I kissed my mother on the cheek because I am not a monster and I do not want to win that way, and I told Ryan congratulations in a tone that even he could not decide was sincere or not. And as I reached the door, my father asked if we could keep this within the family, and I turned and said we will, as long as the family starts acting like one, and I left them with that, which was not a threat and not a promise, it was a line in the sand. And if you are wondering what the secret was that made his face strain like that, you will have to wait, because the next step needed him to spend a night staring at the ceiling while I slept better than I have in years. If you want to understand why a few calm sentences inside a birthday card could drain the color out of my father's face faster than any screaming match ever could, you have to walk back with me through the years when I learned to be useful in a way that looked like maturity, but felt more like quiet damage control. Because while Ryan was the one who needed bailing out and fresh starts and the soft landing that always seemed to be ready exactly when he fell, I was the one who could be counted on. To make calls, to draft emails in a tone that sounded professional and soothing, to sign things that made problems go away, and to nod along when I was told this was family business and that we do not need outsiders complicating what we can handle internally. Which is a nice way of saying that someone gets to make a mess and someone else gets to carry them up. There was a night in my early 20s when the phone rang at an hour that turns your stomach even before you pick it up, and my father, very calm and very focused, asked me to drive him to a place on the edge of town where Ryan was sitting in a room that smelled like rubber flooring and old coffee. And I remember standing there while a polite man with tired eyes explained that a minor incident had gotten bigger because of a stupid comment to the wrong person and because alcohol turns Ryan into a comedian with no sense of audience. And I remember my father taking a breath and saying we will cooperate and keep this clean. And then later, in a different room with fewer people, he asked me to sign a statement that made a misunderstanding sound mutual and harmless, and I did it because I believed that one bad night should not define a person's life, and also because I understood on a level I could not admit back then that if I refused, I would become the problem, and in our house the problem was never the person who caused the situation. The problem was the person who would not play along. Years after that, when Ryan did another thing that needed a cover story, I wrote a timeline that redirected attention and smoothed rough edges and made him look like an accidental passenger in his own mess, and I told myself I was being a good sister. And I told myself that loyalty matters, and I told myself that it was temporary. And if that chorus sounds familiar to you, then you know how fast temporary turns into the family's default operating system. And by the time you notice it, you have a folder in your email called Favors that reads like a history book you cannot show anyone, because every message is a little piece of leverage you wish you did not own. So when I wrote that I was done keeping the kind of secrets that get handed to the responsible child, it was not drama, it was a change in policy, and the line about hoping the condo paperwork was cleaner than the last thing we buried was not a threat. It was a reminder that paper remembers even when people pretend they do not, and that is exactly why the room went quiet, because in our family the only thing scarier than a raised voice is documentation, and I had just announced that I would be documenting everything from now on, not as a weapon but as insurance that the next time I was asked to lie I could answer with receipts. When I got home that night, I sat on my couch and opened my laptop the way some people open a bottle, not to celebrate or to stew, but to steady my mind, and I did a small, simple thing that felt like rinsing dirt off my hands, which was to pull the public record search for the condo's parcel and title history, then set alerts for any filings tied to my father's company or to Ryan's name. And while I was doing that, a friend from high school who now works in real estate replied to a text I had sent earlier with a line that made me sit up a little straighter, because she said she had seen Ryan's post and recognized the development, and that unless the developer changed its standard structure, the deeds can show one name while the financing rides on a corporate line of credit, which is a neat trick until the business that extended the credit starts wobbling, at which point the neat trick becomes a very ugly knot. And then she added that closings there sometimes stretch because the lender wants extra comfort letters, which means the deal is not always as final as a shiny photo makes it look. I am not proud of how satisfying it felt to hear that the picture-perfect gift might be more fragile than advertised, but I am not going to pretend it did not feel like oxygen, because for once I had more than a feeling that things were off. I had a path. And the path was not about revenge for the sake of pain. It was about shifting the ground under the stories my parents tell themselves, those soothing little myths where generosity erases favoritism and where accountability is optional if you smile and call it love. And the cleanest lever I could pull without burning anything down was the kind that makes people imagine the letters I might write if pushed, which brings me to the first deliberate move I made after the card. The next morning, before coffee and before second thoughts, I drafted a brief, polite email to my parents that read like an adult child trying to be helpful and careful, where I thanked them for a lovely dinner and congratulated Ryan again on the milestone. And then, in that same warm tone, I said that because the condo appeared to be structured as a gift paired with company financing, it would be wise to loop in the accountant early so the proper gift reporting was handled and the valuations were documented, and I wrote out the words gift tax and Form 709 and annual exclusion and lifetime exemption without any numbers, because I know who will be reading the narration later. And I added the accountant on copy with a line that said, I remember we had to fix something like this once, and I do not want to repeat that mess. And then I hit send, and if you think that is small, you do not understand how panic travels in families like mine, because within minutes my phone lit up with a call from my father that I let go to voicemail, and a text from my mother asking if I meant anything by the phrase company financing, and another text from Ryan that said this is not your business, and I did not respond to any of them. Because the point was not to argue, the point was to plant a calm, traceable seed that would sprout in the exact direction I needed. What I am admitting here, since we are being honest, is that I wanted them to feel the same nervous breath I have lived with every time I covered something for them, and I wanted the accountant to nudge them with professional language they would not ignore. And I wanted a paper trail that would make it awkward to rewrite the truth later, and while that email was still fresh on the thread, my real estate friend sent one more message that changed the temperature of the whole day, because she had checked her contacts and learned that the condo had not closed yet, that the deed Ryan waved around was a prepped packet awaiting final signatures contingent on a last lender condition, and that the condition involved a letter from the company's board. which I happen to know consists of my father and one nominal member who never wants to sign anything that smells messy. I stared at that message for a long beat, then opened a new note and wrote one simple sentence I knew would land like a hammer. When I chose to use it, and the sentence was this: I would like to see the board letter before it goes out, because if my name appears anywhere in it without my consent, I will send my own letter with attachments. The thing about families like mine is that everyone pretends to hate paperwork until the minute a piece of paper threatens their comfort, and then suddenly forms and filings and wording become sacred scripture. Which is exactly why I spent the next morning not on social media and not on calls with friends, but in a quiet rhythm of emails and calendar invites that looked painfully boring from the outside yet felt like moving furniture inside their heads. Because I copied the accountant again too. Say I had set a quick check-in for later that week to make sure gift reporting, valuation letters, and corporate minutes stayed clean. I added the outside bookkeeper who hates surprises and who once told me flat out that my father's company survives on perception and a line of credit, and in the same breath I added the nominal board member. A retired neighbor who treats signatures like loaded weapons and who always asks questions in groups because he enjoys watching my father scramble for answers when polite eyes are on him, and I kept the tone steady and helpful in a way that could not be twisted into drama. And then I sat back and let the notifications do their work. By midday, the text thread with my parents had turned into that buzzing hive that happens when people try to control a story without admitting the story has already moved. With my mother asking if this all needed to be so formal since it was a gift and family should not need accountants to feel good about generosity, and my father insisting we handle sensitive items offline the way we always have. And me replying in one calm paragraph that given prior learning I felt safer keeping everything in writing, especially because the condo had not yet closed and lender conditions can be particular about related parties and corporate guarantees, which is the kind of sentence that makes executives nod while normal people reach for coffee. And I do not mind which one you are, I only needed my father to understand that I had slipped a professional leash on the situation, and that each tug would bring him closer to a place where bluster stops working. Here is where the first clean strike happened, and it was not loud, which made it better, because when the board member called to say he had no idea there would be a letter at all, and that he did not sign things after dinner anymore, I asked if he wanted me to send over the exact language the lender might require so that he could feel comfortable pushing back if anything looked sloppy, and he said yes, of course, thank you, and I took a breath and sent him 2 short paragraphs that included a sentence I knew would sit like a rock in my father's shoe, a sentence that said the company affirms that no employee, officer, or family member has provided or will provide any personal guarantee, affidavit, or statement on behalf of the borrower, and that any prior incidents requiring corrective filings have been resolved, which was true in spirit if not in every technical footnote, and I CC'd the accountant with a pleasant line about avoiding confusion, and 5 minutes later my father tried to call me again, and I let it go again, because sometimes the most adult thing you can do is refuse to be rushed into a corner where you are expected to apologize for clarity. I know this sounds like inside baseball, but I promise the emotional part is right here, because the moment the neighbor saw that sentence, he asked for a quick group call to confirm what prior incidents meant. And on that call, my father tried to smooth it by saying it referred to an old filing error from years back that had already been handled, and then the accountant, who has the bedside manner of a traffic cop on the last hour of his shift, said something like, "Let us not minimize the exposure we took when the affidavit was used," and the line went quiet in a way I recognized, and I stayed silent because I wanted to hear who my father would blame without my voice on the table, and to his credit, he did not blame me. He just said the family had rallied as families do and that there was no need to revisit the past, and the neighbor cleared his throat and said he would not sign anything that referenced family assistance or implied personal guarantees, and he asked for an updated draft by the end of the day, and I thanked everyone and dropped off the call with a simple "I will wait for the draft" before giving further thoughts, which was me drawing a chalk outline around the lane they would now have to stay in if they wanted this condo to close on time. You asked for the part that feels like justice, and here is mine, because that afternoon I sent a quick message to Ryan that was friendly on the surface and surgical underneath. where I said I was putting together a little list of practical things he would need for his new place, like insurance and utilities and key fob deposits, and that, to keep surprises low, he should ask Dad whether the condo's bank expected any additional letters, since it looked like financing was tied to the company, and I added a smile at the end of the sentence in my head, but not on the screen because I am not 12, and then I waited. And I did not have to wait long, because his fiancée, who is smart and has a sense of smell for financial nonsense, replied to both of us with a crisp question about whether any personal guarantees were being made on their behalf without their knowledge, and when I saw that, I felt the kind of calm that comes when a door opens you were prepared to push yourself, since now there would be another set of eyes on the language and another person asking whether the gift came with invisible strings, and Ryan, who hates looking unprepared in front of her, shot back a defensive text, which was perfect because it pulled my mother into the thread with a request to please stop making this a scene, and I stayed quiet again, because silence has become my favorite microphone. By early evening, the email I had been staring into existence finally arrived. A draft of the board letter that, to my surprise but not shock, included a sentence implying that a prior family affidavit had been voluntary and unrelated to the company. And I read it twice and felt that old mix of anger and relief. Anger because there it was again, the instinct to brush mud under a rug and call the floor clean, and relief because they had given me exactly what I needed to make the next turn, so I replied with a single paragraph that said I could not consent to any wording that distorted my role in earlier events, and that if the history had to be referenced at all, the letter should attach a copy of the corrective filing and remove any implication of personal attestations, and I attached the email chain from that year in which my father asked me to sign and the accountant later confirmed the correction. And I kept the tone even and professional, and then I hit send and sat back with a strange peace that comes from watching people trip over the truth you did not even have to say out loud. If you want the small, satisfying cherry on top, here it is, because just before midnight Ryan finally called with that mix of anger and panic I know too well, asking what exactly I thought I was doing because the lender had paused the closing to review the updated language, and now the move-in date was at risk, and he had already posted about it and told people. And I told him that I was doing what I should have done years ago, which was to keep my name clean and the record straight, and that if he wanted the quickest path to his keys, he should ask our father to provide a letter that did not mention me at all, and that confirmed the company would not blend family favors with corporate obligations. And I let the next sentence sit in my throat until I knew it would come out steady, and I said if my name appears anywhere in this deal, I will send a packet to the lender and to your fiancé with everything attached, every email, every filing, every late-night text. And then I wished him a good night and ended the call, and I lay there staring at the ceiling and felt the old habit of guilt try to climb up my spine and fail, because I knew the next thing I would receive would either be a cleaned-up letter or an attempt to push me back into place. And either way I was ready, which is why when my phone lit up at dawn with a message not from my family, but from my real estate friend saying the lender had requested my contact for verification because my name had somehow been listed as an informal guarantor on a preliminary worksheet, I did not panic. I smiled at the ceiling and thought, perfect, now we do this in daylight. When the lender's assistant left a polite voicemail asking me to confirm that I had agreed to informally backstop Ryan's loan as a family comfort, using that casual phrasing that sounds harmless until you picture the bill coming due, I did not call back with hurt feelings or a shaky voice. I sat down and wrote a calm, steady email that said I had never agreed to guarantee or support this obligation in any form, that any document implying otherwise was inaccurate and unauthorized, and that I would be happy to provide copies of prior correspondence in which I specifically refused to play that role, and then, before I hit send, I added compliance at the bank, the title attorney, the accountant, and the board member as recipients, not to embarrass anyone but to make sure no one could claim later that this was a misunderstanding lost in a phone call, and when I did hit send, I felt that quiet click inside that I only get when a boundary is not just stated but recorded in a way that cannot be peeled off later and blamed on my tone. What came next was predictable if you have ever watched people try to hold a story together with their fingertips, because my father called within minutes to say that now I was making things complicated, and that bankers are skittish, and that this could spook the process, and I told him, still steady, that the process should be spooked if it required pretending I had agreed to something I never agreed to, and that I would not be participating in any cleanup that relied on my silence, and when he began to cycle through the familiar lines about family unity and public perception, I said I was happy to continue the conversation in writing and that any further requests involving my name needed to arrive by email with full wording attached. And I ended the call before he could pull me back into the same loop I have been spinning through since I was young enough to think loyalty meant disappearing myself so that the golden child could shine, which is a sentence I did not say to him. Because I was not trying to win an argument, I was trying to turn off the faucet that kept flooding my life. By late morning, the title attorney replied with a lawyerly note acknowledging receipt and asking for confirmation of my relationship to the borrower, which I provided without fanfare, and then, almost as an afterthought, that was actually the point. I attached the thread from years ago where I was pressed to sign an affidavit to clean up a separate mess, and I highlighted the part where the accountant used the phrase corrective filings, not because I wanted drama, but because I wanted the professionals in the room to understand that I have learned this dance, and I am not stepping onto the floor again, and if they plan to invite me, they should expect me to arrive with documentation and a straight spine. The next domino was Ryan's fiancée, who had been watching the group chat with that tense politeness women develop when they suspect something is off, but do not want to accuse the wrong person, and when she finally reached out privately. She did not ask whether I meant to sabotage anything or whether I was jealous or whether I was making this bigger than it had to be. She asked a single clean question, which was whether I had ever agreed to cover Ryan in any legal or financial way, past or present, and I answered in one long paragraph that I had once signed a statement at our father's request and had regretted it ever since, that I would not do it again, and that I was sorry she was learning about the family's habits in a thread about a home she had already imagined. And then I told her something I had not said out loud to anyone else, which was that none of this was about a condo for me. It was about the pattern that told me my place was to be the quiet scaffolding that held other people's headlines, and I did not ask her to pick a side. I told her I was building a different life where I did not vanish to make space for people who never noticed I was already holding the ceiling. If you are wondering where the revenge is in any of this, you are not wrong to ask, and I will tell you that I do not find revenge in yelling or in humiliating someone in front of strangers. I find it in flipping the script so cleanly that the person who wrote it has to admit the plot never made sense, which is why my next move was not a blast to the whole family or an angry post. It was a measured letter to the company's insurance broker asking for a copy of the director's and officer's policy, and the writer for personal guarantees, with a short note that said a family member's name had been used informally and that I needed to confirm there was no coverage confusion. And I CC'd the board member and the accountant and the outside bookkeeper and left my father off the first line because I wanted a professional to tell him, in a tone he respects, that names have value and that mine was not a free coupon for risk. By afternoon, the neighbor called with the dry humor of a man who has seen too many small-town empires wobble on their own vanity, and he said, in so many words, that he was not going to jail for anyone's condo and that he was delighted to see me get serious about boundaries, and then he told me he had spoken to the lender and insisted all references to family involvement be removed, and that he had asked for an updated draft of the gift letter that did not rely on smoke, and while he was talking, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother that said I was breaking her heart and that she did not understand why I was doing this on the week of my birthday. And I stared at that sentence and felt the old training wake up in my chest. That reflex that says apologize now and make it gentle and scale yourself back until everyone feels better. And I let the feeling pass like a wave, and then I wrote her a long reply that acknowledged her worry and refused to carry it, where I said that I am not breaking the family, I am refusing to be the glue that holds together things that should not be joined. The universe must love symmetry because right after I pressed send, an email arrived from the title attorney with the subject line Revised Ownership Options. And inside there was a casual suggestion that the parties consider adding me to the deed in order to reflect the shared family interest, which was a phrase that made me laugh a little and then breathe more slowly, because there it was, the first real sign that the ground had shifted enough to produce a compromise that looked like generosity, but was actually a retreat, and I did not answer immediately because I wanted them to sit in the possibility that I could say no and let the deal hang in the air like a heavy coat no one wanted to claim. And while I was thinking about my reply, another email came in. This one from an attorney I did not know who identified himself as counsel for my father and who asked me, in stiff language, to cease communications with the lender and to direct all further concerns through him in order to avoid tortious interference, and I read it twice and felt that little spark in my chest that I get when someone tries to move me with a threat. And I smiled without showing anyone and opened a fresh document and wrote a single-page declaration stating that I had been listed without consent, that I had provided corrections in good faith to avoid misrepresentation, and that any attempt to include my name would be met with a formal complaint, and I signed it and scanned it and sent it to the lender. The title attorney, the accountant, the board member, and, yes, to my father's lawyer with a neutral line asking him to confirm receipt, and then I put my phone face down and let the room be quiet again. If you were waiting for the moment that made me feel a little wicked in the best possible way, it was not that letter, and it was not the policy request, and it was not the revised ownership suggestion. It was the text I sent Ryan's fiancée right before dinner. One simple line that said, if you need a clear picture of what you are walking into, ask Ryan to show you the full thread from the year of the affidavit. And when she replied with 3 words that were not polite, I knew the conversation in their house would not be about me being dramatic, it would be about him telling the truth without me in the room. And minutes later, while I was washing a plate, my phone buzzed with a calendar invite from the title company titled Closing Update. Revised deed for review, sender copied to my father and to Ryan and to me, and when I opened the attachment and saw 2 names where there had been 1, I did not celebrate, I did not gloat, I just sat down and read every line twice, and I was still reading when a new message arrived from my father's attorney with a single sentence that changed the air again, a sentence that said, if you insist on being on the deed, our client will require a separate agreement. And when I opened the attachment and saw what they were really asking for, I laughed out loud because it told me exactly where to place the last piece, and no, I am not telling you what was in it yet, because the final move only works if I play it at the exact right minute. When I opened the attachment from my father's lawyer and saw the language he wanted me to accept in exchange for being added to the deed, a tidy bundle of clauses dressed up as standard provisions, that would have forced me to promise silence forever about any prior family incidents, to indemnify the company if my objections caused delays, and to waive any claims arising from the misuse of my name. I sat back and let myself laugh in a way that did not sound unhinged, but did sound free, because the document was a confession written in legalese, and it told me everything I needed to execute the last move. Namely, that they still believed the condo was leverage over me, and that a pretty piece of paper with my name on it would make me forget the shape of what they had been doing for years. Which is precisely why I replied with a calm email that said I would not be signing any agreement that gagged me, that I did not need to be on a deed to be whole, and that if they wanted this transaction to close without further friction, there were 3 things they would do in writing, not as a favor, but as the price of clean air. I wrote the terms in a voice so even I wanted to believe we were just working out office logistics, yet every sentence had teeth. And the first requirement was that the lender receive a signed letter on company letterhead retracting any suggestion that my name had been used as a comfort or guarantee in this or any prior transaction, paired with a board resolution adopting a policy that no family member names would be referenced in corporate financing, period, and that any employee or officer doing so would face termination, which would be an amusing clause if the officer in question were not my father, and the second requirement was that a wire be sent to an escrow account in my name, held by the title company, in an amount equal to the cash value the condo deed represented as a gift, to be labeled family restitution and documented as a lifetime exemption used against my parents' estate. Which sounds clinical until you remember that this is the first time in my adult life That? Anyone in that house would have to recognize, with money not compliments, that the scale had been out of balance for a very long time, and the third requirement was the one that took me the longest to draft because it mattered more than the dollars. A simple acknowledgement letter addressed to me, signed by my father and witnessed by the board member, stating that I had been asked in the past to sign an affidavit in service of the company's interests, that I had done so under pressure, that it would never be requested again, and that any future use of my name without explicit written consent would be considered misrepresentation, which I asked them to deposit with the accountant and to copy to the lender's file, because acknowledgments that live in desk drawers die convenient deaths. I sent those pages without commentary, and then I did something I had not done once during this whole mess, which was to call Ryan's fiancée and ask to meet for coffee. Not to recruit her to my side and not to poison her view of him, but to say that I knew how ugly it feels to be caught in a family's performance, and that if she needed me to state clearly that I had no interest in his property or his money and that I only wanted clean boundaries, I would do it in front of her and she could hold me to it in a year and in a decade. And when she sat across from me with that cautious presence people wear when they are trying to believe two stories at once, I laid out my 3 conditions and told her that the deed could remain in Ryan's name if the other pieces were handled with the same seriousness they had used to handle my silence. And I watched the relief fight with anger in her face, and I left her with a sentence I meant in my bones, that I would rather be solvent and uninvited than included and indebted. And when I walked out, I felt the mean little thrill of realizing my father would learn about this meeting secondhand, which meant he would have to respond to a woman he could not bully and could not guilt, since she does not owe him a childhood. The next 2 days were a parade of controlled tone and lowercase subject lines, my father's lawyer trying to swap verbs and soften the edges, while I sent the words back unchanged. The accountant quietly shepherding the board resolution into final form with the neighbor's signature already there like a seal. The lender's compliance team replying with that professional gratitude that sounds like a nod you can hear. And my mother sending 2 long messages that hovered between plea and accusation, each one asking whether I understood how much stress I was causing and whether I could consider a smaller gesture in exchange for family peace and in the space where I would have caved before. I thanked her for caring, and I repeated the terms, and I said I was not angry anymore, which was true and which confused her, because anger had been my role, and without it I was just a woman drawing a boundary and backing it with receipts. On the morning of the closing update, the title company sent 2 separate sets of documents, one packet for the condo deed in Ryan's name with no reference to me anywhere in the file, and another packet for the escrow and the acknowledgement letter, along with wire instructions flagged for same day. And while I was reviewing those pages, my father finally called with a voice I recognized from the few times in my life when reality pinned him to the mat, and he said he did not like the word restitution because it sounded like a court had been involved, and I said words matter because they tell the truth to people who were not in the room, and that he could call it whatever made him sleep at night as long as the memo line read exactly as written. And then he asked whether I had to send the acknowledgement to the lender and the accountant, and I said yes, because I am done with secrets that make me the villain when I refuse to keep them, and after a breath he said he would sign, and I thanked him like you thank a clerk for handing you change, polite and precise and not 1 inch more. I will not pretend that watching the wire hit the escrow account did not feel like someone took a weight off my chest that I had forgotten I was carrying, and I will not pretend that seeing the acknowledgement letter with my name on it, witnessed and filed where grown-ups file things, did not make my hands shake in a way that had nothing to do with greed, because it was not about the money, it was about the first document in our family history that told the truth without asking me to disappear to make it palatable. And when the lender confirmed the condo closing without me in any capacity, real or imagined, I put my phone down and let the quiet come back, the quiet that is mine now. Not the tense quiet of a room waiting for me to make them comfortable again. The last conversation was with Ryan, who came to me not blustering for once, but with that small voice he uses when he is running out of favors, and he asked if I was happy now and if I understood I had made his life harder. And I told him that I was not happy and that happiness was not the point, that the point was to be free, and that I had given him a cleaner start than any of us had offered him before because now the keys in his pocket were not bought with anyone else's name. And that if he ever tried to slide my name into a mess again, he would not be talking to me. He would be reading a letter he did not want his banker or his wife to see. And he nodded, because even he could see that I was done making threats I did not intend to keep. And then he said thank you in a tone that sounded more like relief than grace, and I let it land without dressing it up as reconciliation, because I am not interested in rewriting our history as a misunderstanding that love can fix. So here is where I leave you, not with a Hollywood hug or a family group photo, but with a folder on my desktop labeled policy where the board resolution sits next to the acknowledgement. With an escrow that released into an account that will make choices easier for me in a life that does not require permission, with a mother who is still texting too much and a father who now pauses before he uses the word family like a trump card, and with a brother who owns his condo without my shadow in the foundation. And if you were waiting for me to say I forgave everyone and we moved on, I will say instead that I stopped auditioning for the part of the good daughter, and I accepted the role of the woman who changed the story by writing it down, and if that sounds cold, I will remind you that warmth without boundaries is just a fire that burns the person tending it, and I am done being kindling, which is why, when I closed my laptop and the room went quiet again, I felt something like the first deep breath after a long dive, the kind that makes you wonder what else you might do now that you are the one holding the air, and that is the part one I'm not going to explain to them, not now, not ever, because some truths are safer where they belong, in my hands, with my name on the line.